The kitchen was dark except for the light from her phone screen, and I watched through the crack in the door as my stepmother measured something into my father's coffee mug with the precision of a pharmacist dispensing medication. It was 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March, and I was witnessing attempted murder in my own home. The green liquid she poured from the antifreeze container caught what little light there was, swirling into the black coffee like a toxic galaxy, and I held my phone steady, recording everything, my hands trembling not from the cold, but from the realization that the woman my father loved was slowly killing him. My name is Ryder Coleman, and I had turned 18 exactly 63 days before that morning. 63 days of legal adulthood. 63 days of being able to access certain records, sign certain documents, and make certain accusations that would be taken seriously by authorities. I had been counting those days, planning, preparing, gathering evidence, because for the last 2 weeks, I had known what Sharon was doing to my father. But that morning was the first time I had actually seen it happen. The first time I had visual proof of what the Google searches, the financial records, and the suspicious timeline had already told me. She was poisoning him with antifreeze slowly, methodically, with the patience of someone who knew that rushing would only raise suspicions. The waiting had been agony. Every day for 2 weeks, I had watched my father grow weaker while I gathered evidence, knowing that each meal, each cup of coffee, each gesture of care from his wife might be killing him. I had wanted to act immediately when I first found those searches, to confront her, to call the police, to scream the truth to everyone who would listen. But I knew how it would look. A teenager accusing his stepmother of attempted murder based on Google searches. I would be dismissed as a jealous kid who couldn't accept his father's new wife, someone watching too much true crime television, having adjustment issues. Sharon would be warned, would cover her tracks, would maybe switch to something undetectable, or simply increase the dose to finish the job quickly. I couldn't risk that. I needed irrefutable proof, the kind that would hold up in court, the kind that would save my father's life and put her behind bars. My father, Daniel Coleman, was dying, and until 2 weeks ago, nobody knew why. The doctors had run every test imaginable. Blood work, MRIs, CT scans, specialists from 3 different hospitals. They found symptoms, but no cause. Kidney problems, but no disease. Heart irregularities, but no defect. Neurological issues, but no tumor. He was falling apart system by system, and the medical professionals were baffled. Sometimes, one doctor had told us with the kind of resignation that comes from admitting defeat, the body just starts shutting down, and we don't know why. It's rare, but it happens. But bodies don't just shut down at 52 years old. Not bodies that belong to men who ran marathons, who built houses with their bare hands, who had never been sick a day in their lives until 3 months ago. That's when the first symptoms appeared. Fatigue that sleep couldn't cure. Dizziness that made him grab walls for support. Nausea that turned him away from foods he had always loved. Sharon had been so concerned, so devoted, driving him to every appointment, sleeping in hospital chairs, crying in waiting rooms where other families could see her dedication. "You're so lucky to have her," a nurse had told my father during one of his many hospital stays. Not many wives would be this devoted. My father had squeezed Sharon's hand and smiled weakly. "I'm the luckiest man alive," he had said, not knowing that luck had nothing to do with it, and being alive was exactly what she was trying to change. The discovery had been an accident, the kind of coincidence that makes you wonder if there's such a thing as fate, or if the universe sometimes decides to reveal its secrets at just the right moment. Sharon had been using my laptop 2 weeks earlier, while hers was updating some massive software patch. She had said she just needed to check her email quickly, and I had told her to go ahead, not thinking anything of it. I was at baseball practice. My father was at another doctor's appointment, and she was alone in the house with access to my computer. When I came home and opened my laptop later that evening, I noticed the Google account logged in wasn't mine. Sharon had forgotten to sign out. My first instinct was to simply log her out and sign back into my own account, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the investigative journalism class I was taking, where our teacher always said, "When opportunity presents itself to learn the truth, a good journalist doesn't look away." Or maybe it was the nagging feeling I'd had for weeks that something about my father's illness didn't add up. Whatever it was, I clicked on her search history. The searches went back months, but it was the recent ones that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. I sat there at my desk, staring at the screen, reading and rereading the queries as if they might change, might become innocent if I just looked at them differently. But they remained what they were, a roadmap to murder, searched for and studied by the woman sleeping in my father's bed. Antifreeze poisoning symptoms timeline. How much antifreeze is fatal for 200-pound man? Can antifreeze be detected in autopsy? How long after death can ethylene glycol be detected? Natural illnesses that mimic poisoning symptoms. Kidney failure causes in middle-aged men. How long does antifreeze stay in system? Life insurance payout investigation timeline. How long to wait before remarrying after spouse death? Young widow. Support groups Phoenix. Moving states after spouse death suspicious. Can stepchildren contest life? Insurance beneficiary. How to act like grieving widow. Ethylene glycol sweet taste. How to mask. Coffee strong enough to hide antifreeze taste. Each search was like a punch to the stomach, each one more damning than the last. She had researched not just how to kill him, but how to get away with it, how to play the grieving widow, how to collect the money and move on to her next life. She had even researched whether I could interfere with her plans, whether as his son I could challenge her inheritance. The answer, apparently, had satisfied her enough to continue. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several of them because they came out blurry. I emailed them to myself, to a new email account I created right then, uploaded them to 3 different cloud storage services. I was 18 years old, technically an adult, but still in high school, and I was gathering evidence of attempted murder against my stepmother. It felt surreal, like I was in one of those true crime documentaries I sometimes watched, except this was my life, my father, my home. That night at dinner, I watched Sharon serve my father his food, pour his drinks, hover over him with what looked like love, but what I now knew was surveillance. She was monitoring her handiwork, watching the poison do its job, probably calculating how much longer it would take. When she caught me staring, she smiled at me with what seemed like genuine warmth. "You okay, Ryder? You're not eating much," she said, her voice full of maternal concern she had perfected over the 3 years since she married my father. "Just thinking about stuff," I replied, forcing myself to take a bite of the lasagna she had made. It was good, perfectly seasoned, the kind of meal a loving wife would make for her family. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could someone who made such careful, delicious meals also be carefully, deliberately poisoning the man she claimed to love? "Senior year stress?" she asked sympathetically. "Don't worry, honey. College will be here before you know it. Your dad and I are so proud of you getting into state. Full scholarship, too. You're going to do amazing things." My father smiled weakly from across the table. He had barely touched his food, pushing it around his plate in a pretense of eating. The antifreeze was destroying his appetite along with everything else. But Sharon kept encouraging him to eat, to keep his strength up, playing the concerned wife to perfection. "Thanks," I managed to say, even as my mind raced with the realization that she was already planning for my absence, for when I would be away at college and unable to protect my father or witness what she was doing. How convenient that must have seemed to her. The stepson leaving for school just as the husband's mysterious illness reached its fatal conclusion. After dinner, I helped clear the table while Sharon helped my father to the couch. He was so weak now that even walking from the dining room to the living room exhausted him. 3 months ago, he had run a half marathon. Now, 20 steps left him breathless. The transformation was horrifying, made worse by knowing it was intentional, orchestrated by someone he trusted completely. "I'm going to do homework," I announced, heading to my room. I needed to research, to understand what I was dealing with, to figure out how to save my father without alerting Sharon to what I knew. If she realized I was onto her, she might accelerate her timeline, increase the doses, or switch to something else entirely. I had to be smart, had to be careful, had to be better at this game than she was. I spent hours that night researching ethylene glycol poisoning. What I learned was terrifying in its simplicity. Antifreeze was sweet-tasting, easily disguised in strong-flavored drinks like coffee or juice. It metabolized into toxic compounds that destroyed the kidneys and other organs. In small doses over time, it mimicked natural kidney disease, making diagnosis difficult. Most importantly, treatment was possible if caught in time, but without treatment, it was invariably fatal. The timeline in the medical articles matched my father's decline perfectly. The early symptoms Sharon had dismissed as stress from work. The progressive worsening she had attributed to some mysterious illness the doctors just couldn't identify. The kidney problems that had started appearing in his recent tests. It was all there. A textbook case of ethylene glycol poisoning hidden in plain sight because no one thought to look for it. Why would they? Who suspects a devoted wife of poisoning her husband? I also researched recording laws in Montana. We were a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was part of, and I could record in my own home without anyone's permission. This was crucial. Whatever evidence I gathered needed to be legally obtained, or it would be useless in court. I ordered 3 small cameras online with overnight shipping, using a prepaid credit card I bought with cash, so there would be no trace on our family accounts that Sharon monitored. The prepaid card had been its own adventure. I had to go to 3 different stores to find one that would work for online purchases, paying cash each time, wearing a baseball cap, pulled low like some kind of criminal. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was acting suspicious to catch someone who was committing murder in plain sight. The cameras cost $300 total, money I had saved from my part-time job at the hardware store, money I had been planning to use for senior trip for one last adventure with my friends before we all went our separate ways for college. Instead, I was using it to try to save my father's life. I also bought a voice recorder, the kind journalists use, small enough to fit in my pocket, but sensitive enough to pick up conversations from across a room. I bought extra memory cards for my phone, external battery packs to ensure I never ran out of power at a crucial moment. I created multiple email accounts, cloud storage accounts, even opened a safety deposit box at a bank where Sharon didn't have accounts. I was 18 years old and building a surveillance network that would have made a private investigator proud. The hardest part was acting normal around Sharon, sitting at dinner, passing her the salt, listening to her talk about her day, all while knowing she was slowly murdering my father. Every meal was agony. I would watch her serve him, my stomach clenched, wondering if she was poisoning this food too, or if she stuck to the morning coffee routine. I started making excuses to be around during meal prep, doing homework at the kitchen table, offering to help with dinner. She seemed pleased by my sudden interest in family togetherness, not realizing I was watching her every move, cataloging every opportunity she had to add poison to his food. The next 2 days were agony. I went to school, pretended everything was normal, watched my father get weaker while Sharon continued her performance as the perfect wife. I started recording our conversations, keeping my phone in my pocket with a recording app running whenever she was around. Most of it was mundane, useless, but I was building a pattern, documenting everything. The cameras arrived on Thursday. They were tiny, designed to look like screws or buttons, completely invisible unless you knew what to look for. I installed one in the kitchen that afternoon while Sharon was at her yoga class. She never missed it, maintaining her image as the health-conscious younger wife who was taking care of herself despite the stress of her husband's illness. The camera gave me a perfect view of the coffee maker and the counter where she prepared my father's drinks. That first night with the camera, nothing happened. She made his evening tea normally. No additions, no suspicious behavior. I started to doubt myself. What if I was wrong? What if the searches were for something else entirely? What if I was about to destroy my father's marriage, his happiness, over a misunderstanding? But then Friday morning came, and I got up early, checking the camera feed from my phone. At 5:45 a.m., Sharon was in the kitchen. I watched in real time as she looked around carefully, then reached into the back of the cleaning supplies cabinet. She pulled out a bottle of antifreeze, the same brand we used for the cars, kept inside because the garage got too cold in winter. She measured a small amount into a medicine cup, then poured it into my father's coffee mug before adding the coffee. She stirred it carefully, rinsed the medicine cup, and put everything back exactly where it had been. I recorded everything on my phone, my heart pounding, so hard I was sure everyone in the house could hear it. This was it. This was proof. But I needed more. One incident could be explained away. I needed a pattern, multiple instances, evidence that couldn't be denied or dismissed. So I kept recording. Saturday morning, same routine. Sunday morning, she added it to his orange juice instead of coffee. Monday morning, back to coffee. Each time the same careful measurement, the same cautious look around, the same methodical cleanup. She was poisoning him every single morning. A steady dose of death served with breakfast. By Monday afternoon, I had 5 recordings and knew I needed to act. My father was getting worse by the day. His skin had taken on a grayish tone. He could barely keep food down, and he had started having tremors. When he stood up from the dinner table that night, he collapsed, crashing into the chair and then to the floor. "Daniel!" Sharon screamed, rushing to his side. Her panic seemed so real, so genuine. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Call 911. Hurry!" I called, my hands shaking as I gave our address. Described his symptoms. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. They loaded my father onto a gurney, Sharon climbing into the ambulance with him, while I followed in my car. During the drive, I made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't gather more evidence while my father died. It was time to act. At the hospital, while Sharon was filling out paperwork at the reception desk, I found the emergency room doctor, a young woman who looked exhausted but alert. Her name tag said Dr. Emily Chun. "I need to talk to you about my father," I said quietly. "Privately. It's urgent." Something in my face must have convinced her, because she led me to a small consultation room and closed the door. The room smelled like disinfectant and fear, the kind of place where bad news was delivered in measured tones. "Test him for ethylene glycol poisoning," I said without preamble. "Antifreeze. Someone's been poisoning him with antifreeze." Her expression shifted from polite attention to sharp focus. "That's a very serious accusation. Why do you think someone is poisoning your father?" I pulled out my phone, showed her one of the videos. My hands were shaking so badly, she had to take the phone from me to watch properly. "That's my stepmother. She's been putting antifreeze in his coffee every morning for months. I have 5 days of recordings, plus her Google search history, where she researched how to poison someone with antifreeze and get away with it. Dr. Chin watched the video, her face growing more serious with each second. She replayed it once, then looked at me with an expression that was part horror, part professional assessment. How long has this been going on? At least 3 months, based on when his symptoms started and her search history. Please, you have to test him. You have to save him. He's all I have left. My voice broke on the last words, the reality of almost losing both parents hitting me all at once. She stood up immediately. Stay here. I'll order the tests right now. And I'm calling the police. What about Sharon? My stepmother. I'll handle it. She won't be allowed near him until we know what's going on. She'd paused at the door. You did the right thing. You might have just saved your father's life. I should have acted sooner, I said, the guilt I'd been carrying for 2 weeks spilling out. I knew for 2 weeks. Every day I waited, she was poisoning him more. You needed evidence, Dr. Chin said firmly. Without it, we might not have tested for antifreeze. Most cases of ethylene glycol poisoning go undetected until autopsy, if then. You did exactly what you needed to do. The next hour was a blur. Police arrived, quiet and professional, separating Sharon from my father's treatment room. I gave them copies of all my evidence, showed them the videos, the search history, the timeline I had created matching her searches to his symptoms. They took Sharon to a separate room for questioning, while the medical team worked on my father. Dr. Chin found me in the waiting room 2 hours later. Your father's blood shows significant levels of ethylene glycol and its metabolites. We've started him on fomepizole and hemodialysis. If we can clear the toxins from his system, he should recover, though there may be some permanent kidney damage. You saved his life. Another week or 2, and it would have been too late. The relief was overwhelming. I sank into the uncomfortable hospital chair and cried for the first time since finding those searches. My father was going to live. I had stopped her. I had saved him. But the night wasn't over. Detective Morrison, a man who looked like he'd seen too much in his career, sat down with me to take my full statement. I walked him through everything. The discovery of the searches, the research I'd done, the cameras I'd planted, the recordings I'd made. He took notes, asked clarifying questions, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. You did excellent work, he said finally. This is some of the most thorough evidence I've seen in a domestic poisoning case. Most of these cases, we don't have nearly this much proof. Most cases, I asked. This happens often. More than you'd think, he said sadly. Poisoning is an intimate crime. It's usually someone close to the victim, someone with access and trust. Spouses, children, caregivers. Your stepmother isn't the first person to think antifreeze was the perfect weapon. While we were talking, another detective was interrogating Sharon. I learned later that she had initially played the shocked, grieving wife, claiming she had no idea how antifreeze had gotten into my father's system. But when they showed her the videos, showed her own search history, her story began to crumble. She tried to claim the searches were research for a novel she was writing. She said the videos must be fake, that I had always hated her and was trying to frame her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The real breakthrough came when they discovered she had done this before. Detective Morrison told me later that they had found a previous husband in Arizona who had died 5 years earlier of kidney failure. The circumstances were suspiciously similar, and that jurisdiction was reopening the case. Sharon, it seemed, was a serial poisoner, a black widow who married men for their money and then slowly killed them with antifreeze. My father woke up the next day, groggy and confused, but alive. The dialysis was working, clearing the poison from his system. When he was coherent enough to understand, I had to tell him everything. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. "Sharon was poisoning you, Dad," I said, holding his hand in the hospital bed. "She's been putting antifreeze in your coffee for months." He stared at me, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally, a terrible understanding. "The coffee," he said slowly. "She always insisted on making my coffee, said it was her way of showing love." "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. For not catching it sooner? For destroying his marriage? For being the one to tell him the woman he loved was trying to kill him? "You saved me," he said, squeezing my hand weakly. "My God, Ryder, you saved my life. How did you know?" I told him everything. The accidental discovery, the investigation, the cameras. He listened, tears rolling down his face, not just from physical pain, but from the emotional devastation of betrayal. "I loved her," he said quietly. "I really loved her. How could I have been so blind? She fooled everyone, Dad. She was really good at pretending." "But not good enough to fool you," he said with something like pride mixed with his grief. "My 18-year-old son saw what I couldn't. The recovery was slow, both physically and emotionally. My father spent 3 weeks in the hospital, undergoing regular dialysis treatments while his kidneys recovered. The damage wasn't as permanent as the doctors had feared, though he would need to monitor his kidney function for the rest of his life. The psychological damage was harder to measure and would take much longer to heal. Sharon was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. When they investigated further, they found she had already been in contact with real estate agents about selling our house, had been researching luxury apartments in Phoenix, and had opened several credit cards in my father's name without his knowledge. She had been setting up her new life while slowly ending his. The trial was a sensation in our small Montana town. The local news covered it extensively. The devoted wife, who was actually a killer, the teenage son who turned detective to save his father. They wanted to interview me, to make me some kind of hero, but I declined. I wasn't a hero. I was just a son who loved his father and happened to be in the right place at the right time to discover the truth. The courthouse was packed every day of the trial. I recognized many faces: Dad's employees, our neighbors, people from church, kids from school. Everyone wanted to see the woman who had fooled them all, who had sat next to them at community barbecues and PTA meetings while slowly poisoning her husband. The media had nicknamed her the Antifreeze Black Widow, and reporters from as far as California had come to cover the trial. Sharon's appearance had changed dramatically. Gone was the perfectly styled blonde hair, the carefully applied makeup, the designer clothes she had bought with my father's money. She appeared in court looking pale and plain, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a modest gray suit that her public defender had probably picked out to make her look less threatening. It was another performance, I realized. The wrongly accused woman, confused and frightened by these terrible allegations. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. The prosecutor, a woman named Jennifer Martinez, who had driven up from Helena specifically for this case, laid out the evidence methodically. She showed the jury a timeline on a large screen, Sharon's Google searches on top, my father's symptoms below, each search corresponding to a new development in his illness. She played excerpts from my recordings, Sharon's voice filling the courtroom as she discussed my father's impending death with her sister. She showed financial records, the life insurance policies Sharon had taken out, the credit cards she had opened in my father's name, the real estate listings she had bookmarked for homes in Arizona. "This wasn't a crime of passion," Martinez said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "This was murder as a business plan. Sharon Coleman, or should I say Linda Garrett, as we now know her real name to be, selected Daniel Coleman as a target, married him for his money, and then slowly, methodically poisoned him with antifreeze. documenting her research every step of the way. Sharon's sister, Patricia, became a key witness for the prosecution. Faced with potential conspiracy charges, she revealed everything. Sharon had been planning this for over a year. She had specifically targeted my father at the construction company's annual barbecue, knowing he was a widower with money. She had researched our family, learned about my mother's death, my college plans, my father's habits and routines. We had been studied like subjects in an experiment, our vulnerabilities cataloged and exploited. She said he was perfect, Patricia testified, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the courtroom. Rich enough to be worth it, but not so rich that there would be lots of lawyers and scrutiny. And with his son leaving for college, she would have complete control. The prosecution played my recordings in court. The jury watched Sharon methodically poison my father's coffee, heard her discuss his impending death with her sister, saw the Google searches planning his murder. Her defense attorney tried to argue that the searches were taken out of context, that the videos didn't definitively show antifreeze being added, that I had manipulated evidence because I resented my stepmother. But the forensic evidence was undeniable. They had tested the antifreeze bottle from our house. It had Sharon's fingerprints and DNA on it. They had found the medicine cup she used, which tested positive for ethylene glycol residue despite being washed. Dr. Chin testified about the levels of poison in my father's system, how they corresponded exactly with the timeline of Sharon's activities. A forensic computer expert verified that the searches were genuine, made from Sharon's account on dates that matched my father's declining health. The evidence was overwhelming, methodical, and damning. During the trial, more details emerged about Sharon's past. Her real name wasn't even Sharon. It was Linda Garrett, and she had a string of identities, a pattern of relationships with older men who had died or suffered mysterious illnesses. The prosecutor suggested she might have been responsible for as many as 4 deaths across 3 states. She was, they said, a serial killer who used marriage as her weapon and antifreeze as her bullet. Sharon took the stand in her own defense, still trying to play the victim. She cried. She proclaimed her innocence. She said she was being framed by a stepson who had never accepted her. But under cross-examination, her story fell apart. She couldn't explain the searches. She couldn't explain why her fingerprints were on the antifreeze bottle when she claimed never to have touched it. She couldn't explain the recorded conversations with her sister. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 25 to life, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As they led her away, she looked at me with such hatred that I actually stepped back. But there was something else in her eyes, too. Respect, maybe, or recognition. One predator acknowledging another who had bested them. After the trial, my father and I had to rebuild our lives. The house felt contaminated by what had happened there, so we sold it and moved to a smaller place closer to town. My father retired from the construction company, selling his share to his partner. He said he wanted to spend whatever time he had left actually living, not just working toward a future that had almost been stolen from him. "I feel like an idiot," he said one evening, sitting on the porch of our new house. We had been there a month, and boxes were still stacked in corners, neither of us quite ready to fully unpack and settle in. "You're not an idiot," I said. "She was a professional. This is what she did. But I should have seen something. Some sign. Dad, she fooled everyone. The neighbors, your friends, the doctors. Everyone thought she was the perfect wife. Everyone except you. I got lucky. If she hadn't used my laptop, if she had remembered to log out, we never would have known until it was too late." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your mother would be proud of you. You protected me, protected our family. You did what I should have been able to do for myself." Mom would have seen through Sharon from day one, I said, and we both laughed because it was probably true. My mother had been sharp, observant, never one to be fooled by surface charm. I started college that fall as planned, though I changed my major from business to criminal justice. The detective who had worked our case, Detective Morrison, had written me a recommendation letter saying I had natural investigative instincts. The experience had changed me, shown me that I had a skill for seeing what others missed, for gathering evidence, for building cases. Maybe I could use that to help other people, to stop other Sharons before they succeeded. My father started dating again 2 years later, which surprised me. After what had happened, I thought he would never trust another woman, but loneliness, he said, was its own kind of poison. This time, though, he was careful. Background checks, slow progression, maintaining separate finances, and he insisted I meet anyone he dated, trusting my instincts more than his own. "You've got the serial killer radar," he joked, though it wasn't really a joke. He eventually married a woman named Grace, a widow his own age, who had lost her husband to actual cancer. She was kind, but not too kind, affectionate, but not performatively so. She had bad days and good days, got frustrated sometimes, was beautifully, wonderfully human in all the ways Sharon had never been. They were happy together, in a quiet, genuine way that had nothing to do with grand gestures or perfect devotion. I became something of an expert on poisoning cases, consulted sometimes by law enforcement when they suspected intimate partner poisoning. It was a strange specialty to have at 25, but it was needed more than most people realized. Poisoning was often overlooked, misdiagnosed, attributed to natural causes. The victims were usually already vulnerable: elderly parents, sick spouses, trusting partners. The perpetrators were usually the last people anyone suspected: devoted children, caring spouses, dedicated caregivers. 5 years after Sharon's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. "Writer, I underestimated you. That was my mistake. I thought you were just another self-absorbed teenager who wouldn't notice anything beyond your phone and your friends. I was wrong. You were watching. You were learning. You were waiting. I won't insult your intelligence by proclaiming my innocence. We both know what I did. What I want you to know is that I'm not sorry. Your father was a means to an end, nothing more. The money would have set me up for life. I had earned it, playing the perfect wife for 3 years. You cost me everything, but I respect the game you played. You were patient, thorough, smart. In another life, we might have been allies instead of enemies. By the time you read this, I'll probably be dead. The women here don't like husband killers, and I've made enemies, but I wanted you to know you won. Not because you were righteous or good, but because you were better at this than I was. Sharon or Linda, or whoever I really am." I showed the letter to my father, who read it with an expression I couldn't quite read. "She still doesn't get it," he said finally. "She thinks it was a game. She thinks you were playing by her rules." "What do you mean?" "You weren't trying to beat her at her game, Ryder. You were trying to save me. There's a difference between being a predator and being a protector. She'll never understand that difference." He was right. Sharon had seen everything through the lens of manipulation and strategy. She couldn't comprehend that I had acted out of love, not calculation. That I had been desperate, not clever. That saving my father had been the only goal, not winning some twisted game. Sharon died in prison 2 months after sending that letter. The official cause was a heart attack, though there were rumors of foul play. I didn't attend the funeral. There was no funeral, actually. No one claimed her body. She was cremated by the state and interred in a prison cemetery under the name Linda Garrett, her real name, with just a number on the marker. All her planning, all her schemes, all her murders, and she ended up in an anonymous grave with no one to mourn her. My father lived another 12 years after the poisoning. He saw me graduate college, attend the police academy, become a detective specializing in domestic crimes. He walked my sister, technically my half-sister, Grace's daughter, down the aisle at her wedding because her biological father had passed. He held his grandchildren, played with them in the yard of the house he shared with Grace, told them stories, but never the story of Sharon. When he finally passed, it was quick, a heart attack in his sleep at age 64. Natural, peaceful, the kind of death Sharon had tried to deny him. At his funeral, hundreds of people came. Friends, family, former employees, people whose houses he'd built, whose lives he'd touched. The church was full of people who genuinely mourned him, who shared real stories of his kindness, his humor, his integrity. He got 12 extra years, Grace said at the reception, squeezing my hand. 12 years he wouldn't have had if you hadn't saved him. That's 12 years of memories, of love, of life. You gave him that. She was right. Those 12 years had been a gift, stolen back from a would-be killer by an 18-year-old with a laptop and the courage to act on what he'd discovered. They hadn't always been easy years. The trauma of Sharon's betrayal had left scars, but they had been real years, lived fully and authentically. Now, at 35, the same age Sharon had been when she tried to kill my father, I run a private investigation firm specializing in domestic crimes that others miss or dismiss. We handle about a dozen poisoning cases a year, most of them intimate partner situations. Sometimes it's antifreeze, sometimes it's medication, sometimes it's household chemicals. The methods vary, but the pattern is almost always the same. Someone in a position of trust, slowly killing someone who loves them, usually for money or freedom. My office is in downtown Billings now, a small suite on the 3rd floor of a building that overlooks the Yellowstone River. The walls are covered with certificates and commendations, newspaper clippings about cases I've solved, thank you letters from families I've helped. But the most important thing in the office is the small camera in my desk drawer, the one that recorded Sharon poisoning my father's coffee. It's my reminder of where this all started, of why I do what I do. Last month, I worked a case that hit particularly close to home. A 19-year-old college student named Marcus had called me from Bozeman. His mother had remarried 2 years ago, and his stepfather had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on her. She had started getting sick shortly after, mysterious symptoms that doctors couldn't explain. The parallels to my own experience were eerie. Marcus came to my office on a Friday afternoon, driving 2 hours from college. He was tall and athletic, but stress had carved lines into his young face that shouldn't have been there. He reminded me of myself at that age, desperate, scared, but determined. "Everyone thinks I'm being paranoid," he said, slumping in the chair across from my desk. "My mom, my grandparents, everyone. They say Tom loves her, that he would never hurt her. But I know something's wrong. I can feel it." I believed him. That instinct, that feeling that something is fundamentally wrong even when everything looks right on the surface. That's not paranoia. That's evolution. That's thousands of years of human survival instinct telling you that the person sharing your cave might be a threat. We investigated for 3 weeks. I taught Marcus how to document everything without being detected, how to gather evidence legally, how to build a case that would hold up in court. We discovered that Tom was poisoning his mother with small doses of her own heart medication, grinding up extra pills and adding them to her food. The overdoses were causing her symptoms, but were low enough that they didn't show up as dangerous levels in standard blood tests. The confrontation happened at a family dinner. Marcus had invited me as a friend from college, and I had cameras and recording equipment hidden on my person. When Tom prepared his wife's plate in the kitchen, Adding the ground medication to her mashed potatoes, I documented everything. When he brought it to her, I stood up. "Don't eat that," I said simply. The room exploded in confusion, but within an hour, the police were there, the food was being tested, and Tom was in handcuffs. Marcus's mother survived, recovered fully, and is now an advocate for domestic violence awareness. Marcus himself is studying criminal justice now, inspired to help others the way I helped him. My success rate is high because I know what to look for, know the signs that others miss. The sudden devotion that seems performed rather than felt, the isolation of the victim from friends and family, the mysterious illness that baffles doctors, the caregiver who seems almost eager for the end, who has already begun planning their next life, while their victim still clings to this one. Last week, a young woman came to my office. She was 20, scared, holding a folder of printed emails and web history. Her grandfather was dying, and she thought her mother might be poisoning him. Everyone said she was crazy, paranoid, watching too much true crime TV. But I saw myself in her eyes, that desperate certainty that something was terribly wrong mixed with the fear that no one would believe her. "Tell me everything," I said, and I meant it. Every detail, every suspicion, every gut feeling she had. She talked for 2 hours, showing me her evidence, explaining the timeline, crying from frustration and fear. Her mother had increased her grandfather's medication doses, had researched drug interactions, had already contacted estate lawyers. It was all so familiar, so similar to what I had experienced that it was like looking back in time. "Everyone thinks I'm losing it," she said finally. "My dad, my brothers, even my boyfriend. They think I'm having some kind of breakdown." "I believe you," I said simply, and the relief on her face was immediate and profound. "And we're going to save your grandfather." We did save him. Her mother had been giving him 3 times the prescribed dose of his heart medication, trying to induce a fatal arrhythmia that would look like natural death in an elderly man with a heart condition. She was arrested. The grandfather recovered, and another family was saved from the particular horror of discovering too late that love can be a weapon and trust can be fatal. The young woman, Sarah, sent me a card last month. Her grandfather had just celebrated his 85th birthday, surrounded by family who now knew how close they had come to losing him. "He got to see another birthday because of you," she wrote, "because you believed me when no one else would." But she had saved him, not me. She had noticed what others missed, had trusted her instincts, had fought for someone who couldn't fight for themselves. I had just helped her gather the evidence in a way that would hold up in court, had given her the validation she needed to act. The courage had been all hers. That's what Sharon never understood in her letter. It was never about being better at the game than she was. It was about love being stronger than greed, about protection being more powerful than predation, about the bond between family members being worth more than any amount of money. She had seen my father's trust as weakness to exploit. I had seen it as something precious to protect. The camera that recorded Sharon poisoning my father sits in my office desk drawer, obsolete now in the age of smart home technology, but kept as a reminder, not of victory, but of vigilance, of the morning when an 18-year-old boy stood in his kitchen watching his stepmother pour antifreeze into his father's coffee and decided that this was where it would end. My father got 12 more years because I was watching. 12 years of sunsets and birthdays, of quiet mornings with grace and loud dinners with family, of seeing his son become a man and his grandchildren come into the world. 12 years that Sharon had tried to steal but couldn't, because love sees what greed blinds itself to. Every case I take, every poisoner I catch, every victim I save, is a continuation of that morning in March when I was 18 and saw something I was never supposed to see. Some people might call it trauma that I've turned into a career. I call it purpose. Sharon showed me the worst of what humans are capable of. Betrayal, so complete it extends to the coffee you make for someone you claim to love. But in stopping her, I discovered what I was capable of too. She was right about one thing in her letter. I had been watching. I had been learning. I had been waiting, but not to play her game. I had been gathering the strength and evidence to do what needed to be done, to save the only parent I had left, to prove that sometimes the youngest person in the room is the only one who can see clearly. My name is Ryder Coleman. When I was 18 years old, I discovered my stepmother was poisoning my father with antifreeze. I saved his life, sent her to prison where she died alone and unmourned, and found my life's purpose in the process. I'm 35 now, the same age she was when she tried to kill him, and I've spent 17 years making sure other families don't suffer what mine almost did. The green liquid swirling into the coffee, I still dream about it sometimes. But it's not a nightmare anymore. It's a reminder that evil often comes disguised as love, that the people who are supposed to care for us can be the ones hurting us, and that sometimes a teenager with a phone camera and the courage to act is all that stands between life and death. Sharon thought she was smart. She thought she had planned the perfect murder. She thought no one would suspect the devoted wife, the one who made his coffee every morning with such care. She forgot that someone else lived in that house, someone who loved the victim more than she loved the money, someone who would notice when devotion was just performance and care was just calculation. She forgot about the son who had already lost one parent and would do anything to avoid losing another. She forgot that 18-year-olds aren't always as self-absorbed as adults think they are. She forgot that love pays attention in ways that greed never can. Most of all, she forgot that coffee is supposed to be an act of love, not a delivery system for poison. Every morning now, when I make my own coffee, I think about that. About how the simplest gestures can carry the deepest betrayals or the truest love. About how trust is both necessary for life and potentially fatal. About how the difference between medicine and poison is often just dosage and intent. My father died peacefully at 64, surrounded by people who truly loved him. Sharon died violently at 40, surrounded by no one. The 12 years between what she planned and what happened. Those years were my gift to him, payment for all the years he had given me. They were years of healing, of learning to trust again, of building new memories to overshadow the poisoned ones. In her letter, Sharon said I had won, but she was wrong about that too. There were no winners in what happened. There was just a son who loved his father, a father who survived attempted murder, and a woman who threw away everything for money she would never get to spend. If anyone won, it was justice, and even that victory was bitter, tinged with the knowledge that it had almost come too late. The cameras I use now in my investigations are smaller, more sophisticated, connected to apps that alert me instantly to suspicious activity. The technology has evolved, but the human element remains the same. Someone trusts someone they shouldn't. Someone sees dollar signs where they should see a human being. Someone decides that murder is easier than divorce, that inheritance is worth more than integrity. And somewhere, if they're lucky, someone else is watching. Someone who loves the intended victim more than they fear the confrontation. Someone who will gather evidence, call the police, testify in court. Someone who will stand between the poisoner and their target and say, "Not this time. Not this person. Not on my watch." That's what I did at 18, and it's what I do now at 35. I watch for the signs others miss. I listen to the people others dismiss. I believe the paranoid family members who insist something is wrong, because I know what it's like to be that person, to see something terrible that no one else can see, to know that if you don't act, someone you love will die. Sharon is gone. My father is gone. But the work continues. Every poisoner I catch, every victim I save, is proof that what happened in our kitchen that March morning mattered. that an 18-year-old's courage can defeat an adult's cruelty. That love, even young love, even inexperienced love, is stronger than greed will ever be. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I've left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult doesn't happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it's like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are.